In this video, we're going to again talk about solving 3x3 matrices, and in the last video we talked about solving them so that they were in reduced row echelon form, and that means like this, where we're getting the zeros, the 3 zeros down in the left hand corner and also those 3 zeros in the upper right hand corner. So with row echelon form, we're actually going to do this mapping, but we're going to stop when we get to that 1. So we want to have all these 1 along the diagonal and then these 3 zeros. And then we're going to do something a little bit different to find the rest of this. And that's what I'm going to show you with this row echelon form. All right, and both ways work great. Some people just prefer one way over another way, and so I just suggest that you know both ways and decide which way will be better for you. And sometimes on the homework and when you're solving it, it will ask you to solve it in a certain method. So let's go ahead and write the augmented matrix for this. And we'll get so we'll have 1, -2, -2, and then draw our line straight down, and then a +2 on the other side there. And then we have 1, -1, -5, and -1, right? I'm just taking the coefficients off of these equations and writing them in here. And then I have 2, -7, 4, and 13. All right, so that is what it starts off looking like, and so that's what I want to try and talk about here. So remember, when we're with our mapping, we want that first upper left-hand corner number to be a 1, and it already is, so that's great. So the next thing that we need to do is get the one that's just underneath it to be a 0. So remember that our row operations, the things that we can do here, is we can multiply by a number and then add it to another number. And we do that a lot when we're trying to make zeros. And that's what we're going to do in this case. So in order to make this be a 0, I'm going to take my row 1 and multiply it by a -1. So I'll have -1 times row 1. And then I'm going to add that to row 2. Remember, the one that we're adding to is the one that's changing. All right, so if I write out a new matrix underneath it, right, then the only one that's going to be changing is row 2. So let's go ahead and write down row 1 and row 3. Okay. And then I'll just do a little side work over here to figure out what our new row 2 is going to look like. So I'm going to multiply row 1 by a negative, so everything's going to change to a negative there. So -1, +2, +2, and then -2. And I'm going to add that to row 2 here, which is 1, -1, -5, and -1. And when I add those together, right, that's what I'm doing. That's that adding part that I'm doing here. Then I'm going to end up with 0, 1, -3, and -3. All right, so that's what I come up with on that part when I do that. All right, so then, let's see, row 1 and row 2. All right, so let's go ahead and write that in as my new row 2 here. All right, so I've got 0, 1, -3, and -3. All right, so now I want to get that one there to be a 1, but it already is, so that's awesome. So now I just need to go down here and make this 2 be a 0, right? So that lower left-hand corner, trying to make that 2 down here into a 0. So I'm going to have to do the same kind of thing that I did above there. So let me write down my new matrix. All right, let's think about what I need to do here. So I'm going to take and multiply row 1 by a -2 so that when I add it to row 3, I get a 0. Right? So -2 times row 1 plus row 3. Right? And so that means that only row 3 is changing. So let's go ahead and write our row 1 and row 2 in. Right, and then my row 3, I'm going to do a little bit of workout here. Like I said, you can do this in your head, and the way I usually go about it is I'll do -2 times 1 is -2 plus 2 is 0. And I'll kind of go about it that way. I'll do it like that on this so you can see, and then I'll do -2 times -2 is a +4 minus 7 is a -3. All right, but sometimes people get a little bit lost in that. All right, but I did -2 times -2 is a +4 minus 7 is a -3. -2 times -2 is a +4 added to 4 will give me 8. -2 times a +2 is a -4 added to 13 will give me 9. All right, so I can go about it that way, but like I said, for some students it's easier to have a little bit of work out to the side to make sure that they're doing that correctly. But I hope you can get to the point where you're doing it that way. So, but you got to just, keep working on it and keep practicing and find a way that works best for you. So I'll do -2, right? I'm multiplying the first row by -2. So -2, then I'll have +4, +4, and then -4. And then I'm adding it to row 3, so that's 2, -7, 4, and 13. And when I add those together, I get 0, -3, 8, and 9, which is what I put in there, right? So that's what I got on that one, right? And this one became our new row 2 on that. Okay, so let's keep going, right? So we now have these all zeros, we got a 1, so now we've got to make that -3 that's on the bottom row into a 0. So let's make our new matrix here. Oopsie. So in order to get this to be a 0, I need to use that 1 up above it. And that's why we went and, we have this mapping that I showed you up here where we're making this into a 1 before we make that one into a 0. It's going to make things go a lot smoother for us if we do that. So, because now I can take the row 2 and multiply it by a +3. So 3 times row 2 plus my row 3. Right, so again, just row 3 is what's changing this time. So let's write out the other rows. Nothing changed on those. All right, but when I do a little side workout here, 3 times 0 is 0. 3 times 1 is 3. 3 times -3 is -9. And then also another -9. And then I'm going to add it to row 3, which is 0, -3, 8, and 9. And so when I add those guys together, right, I get 0, 0, -1, and 0. Okay, so that's going to be my new row here. That's going to give me 0, 0, -1, and 0. All right, we're getting really close here. The only thing that I have on this now is notice that this is a -1, but I need that to be a +1. And so basically I'm going to multiply that row by a negative. All right, so I'm going to do -1 times my row 3. But that's not going to change my 0 over here. Really, all it changes that minus to a positive, and 0 doesn't carry a sign, so it doesn't change its sign there. Okay, so now this is where I said, so this is, we're doing row echelon form. So we could do reduced row echelon form and get these other 3 numbers up here to be zeros, but notice what I'm going to do here now. Okay, I'm going to take these 3 equations and I'm going to write them down, or sorry, as the matrix, and I'm going to write them in equation form now. Okay, so that row 1 really says x, because my first column are my x's, minus 2y, because my second column is my y's, minus 2z equals 2. All right, my second row, row number 2, is just going to say y minus 3z equals -3. And then my last row says z equals 0. So I already found one answer, right, is this z equals 0. And then I'm going to use that to help me find what my other x and z, or my x and y are. All right, so notice what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this 0 and I'm going to put it in place of z in the equation right above it. All right, when I do that, I get y minus 3 times 0 equals -3. All right, so, well, 0 times anything is just 0, so I really just get y equals -3. So I found another part of my answer, right? Y is -3. And now I need to take both of those and put those into the top equation to figure out what x is. All right, so if I take my -3 and put it in place of y, and take my z and put that 0 and put it in place of z, all right, then really what I get here, write it out over here, I have x minus 2 times -3 minus 2 times 0 equals 2. Well, 0 times anything is just 0, so that's gone. But here I have x. -2 times -3 is a +6. And then I'll subtract that 6 over. So I get x equals -4. All right? And so my answers, right, that I have for this are x equals -4, y equals -3, and z equals 0. And you could write those as an ordered triple. Remember our x, our y, and our z. So x is -4, y is -3, and z is 0. And so that would be my answer. Okay, I hope that you can tell the difference between reduced row echelon form and row echelon form. Remember, this was row echelon form where we didn't make these zeros up here. Instead, we did some back substitution once we knew what 0 or what z was. So we got this to be a 1 equals something down here. Okay.